For us. Thank you, Shaq. A story getting a lot of attention from Democrats in South Carolina this weekend. The president's sudden delay of ICE raids that were set to start today to round up undocumented immigrants across the country. Trump says it's because Democrats asked him for the delay for negotiations, though NBC reporting shows there were concerns in the White House about how the raids would be carried out and the negative reaction to the plan. One candidate had an intense reaction to the news. Take a listen.
This is bull. This is his bull politics. People need to see through that and understand that this guy is a political con man.
The candidate with the colorful language, shall we say, joins us right now. Julián Castro, former HUD secretary and former mayor of San Antonio. Mr. Secretary, thank you for taking the time today and being with us.
Good to be with you, Richard.
Mr. Secretary, as we look at what has been offered by the president specific to the introduction to the segment, isn't 2 weeks better than no weeks for the conversation of coming up potentially here with another solution?
Well, what this administration should do is it should end family separations and also end family detention. I mean, for folks who are following this, and I know a lot of the viewers watching do, you notice what happens time after time with this president, whether it's what he says he did with regard to pulling down an airstrike against Iran 10 minutes before it was supposed to happen, or yesterday saying that he suddenly called off these ICE raids at the request of Democrats, is that he likes to create a circus, but there's never a solution. He creates the crisis, pretends to solve it, but it never really gets solved. And so I believe that what we need to focus on is when are we going to make sure that these children are no longer separated from their families and that they're no longer put in these detention facilities with these conditions in the first place?
I want to move to another topic that you are certainly one of the experts of our country on, and that has to do with housing. Serving as the Secretary of HUD for 3 years, there's some new numbers that came out this month that show a large increase in homelessness in Los Angeles, for instance. What is your solution, you think, if you're able to have that wish from the bottle, right, from the genie? What would you do to stop this rise in homelessness across the country in major cities?
Yeah, to me, housing is a human right. And so I put forward a couple of weeks ago a housing plan that would invest in creating millions of more units of homes that are affordable to the middle class and to the poor. It would invest so that we end family homelessness, chronic homelessness, youth homelessness, veteran homelessness by 2028. And it would also connect the dots between homelessness, other housing opportunity, things like the fact that where you live often determines what kind of education your child can get, what kind of transit opportunities and job opportunities you have. Yeah. So we need to do all of those things, but we absolutely need to address homelessness. And by the way, Richard, I hope that this is one of the questions at the debate on Wednesday and Thursday, because this crisis that we have of housing opportunity, of people paying so much for their rent, 50 or 60% of their income, it touches everybody, whether you're Republican or Democrat, but they never ask about it at these debates, these presidential debates. I hope that with MSNBC and NBC hosting it, that changes
and we're going to get to
on
that.
Wednesday.
And you'll be there. So specifically, you didn't give me any idea about how you would change the dynamic. Would you focus on transitional housing? Would you focus on long-term housing? Would you focus on emergency housing? What is that 15 to 20 second soundbite that can give us an idea, because you're an expert on this again, of what you would do?
Yeah, I would focus on permanent supportive housing with a housing first model. In other words, creating enough units so that people can get housing right away, and they have support services so that if they have a mental health issue, or they have to go back and get their GED or some other issue, they have those services around them. Using that basic model, we drove veteran homelessness down by 47% between 2010 and 2016. So we've seen that this can happen, but what it takes is the investment in resources.
How did you do that? Because you're giving a head nod here to what some folks know and don't know, but you know quite well. And some say at every night in America, 1 out of 3 of the homeless, those who are homeless, are veterans.
That's right. It's one of the most shameful things about what happens in our country. This was an example of Washington working the way that it should. In 2010, President Obama released a vision that said, look, we're going to end veteran homelessness. The Congress appropriated housing choice vouchers and enough resources to case manage with the VA to get those vouchers into the hands of veterans that needed it. Cities across the United States and smaller communities adopted best practices like Housing First and something called coordinated entry. So they worked on, prioritized driving down the number of homeless in their community. And because of that, there were 3 states and 36 different cities across the country that got to functional zero on veteran homelessness.
Amazing.
And in my plan, I say that if we can do it there, we can do it for family homelessness, youth homelessness, and other types of homelessness.
A lot of people are rooting for that, should that happen, Mr. Secretary. We've talked about veterans so far. It related to immigration and the headline that's come out over the last week with the president and his moves towards deportations. You have said that you would allow veterans back into the United States if you win the White House. Tell us why veterans are important to you. Obviously, you're a mayor of a major city that represents veterans in the military, a former mayor.
Yeah, you know, I served as mayor of San Antonio. San Antonio proudly calls itself Military City,
That's right.
USA.
Yeah.
So we have thousands of veterans who have been deported, mostly who are living in Mexico today. There are communities of United States veterans who have been deported that are living down there. In my People First immigration plan, I say that as soon as I get into office, we will bring those deported veterans back. They have served our country honorably. They went above and beyond in service of this country, and I believe that they ought to be granted citizenship for their service. And it's that simple. I believe that they deserve it.
I want to move on to another topic, and that has to do with reparations. That has been certainly discussed for the last year with a lot of energy. You are not going to rule out direct checks to African Americans, unlike some of your other competitors here in the space. Why?
Because I think that we need to support H.R. 40, which is Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's bill that would create a commission to look at reparations, people that are respected from across the country, from different communities, and then make a recommendation to the president on how we would do reparations. And I see this as analogous to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. In other words, the healing that goes with that process is as important as the actual solution. So I won't rule anything out. I believe that everything is on the table there.
Is there a
we need to go through that process.
Is there a range, Mr. Secretary, in terms of what you might consider?
Again, I believe that at this point we need to focus on the process. Yeah, and that we can get to a reasonable approach to this. What I don't think that we should do is skip over that, because that's the important part of bringing Americans together, realizing that we have to address this original sin of slavery. I don't believe that we can move forward as one nation with one destiny in the 21st century until we address that original sin in a meaningful way. And there are a range of different options for how we could do it, but first you have to go through a process that's meaningful.
All right, so you mentioned the debate. You're probably doing a couple of preparations for it, Mr. Secretary, and I might ask you, what do you hope to accomplish? This as you stand next to Senator Cory Booker, an individual who you've seen and on the circuit, if you will, just yesterday, for instance, speaking in South Carolina. How will you stand out next to a person who many might call very charismatic?
Well, the first thing is I asked Cory the other day when I saw him in South Carolina what color tie he's going to wear. I want to stand out by not wearing the same tie
red
color as he is. He told me blue, but he said that he would text me what he's going to wear. Look, for me, as a lot of the folks watching out there know, my name ID is not as high as some of the other candidates. So this is the moment where more people are going to be watching what's happening in this 2020 campaign than have watched before. It's a moment where I need to introduce myself to a lot of American voters who may not have been paying attention up till now. I have that opportunity. I've laid out a very strong vision for our country's future to be the smartest, the healthiest, the fairest, and the most prosperous nation on earth. And what I want to do on Wednesday night, and when I have a chance to answer these questions, is to let Americans know how I would do that. We've released plans on education, immigration, housing, police reform, getting lead contamination out of our country. And I want to be able to let people know what I would do to improve their lives.
As the closing of the segment, Mr. Secretary, what will your 15-second closing statement be at the debate?
We actually have 45 seconds, thankfully.
I'm giving you 15.
Yeah, I would say, look, that together we can create a prosperous America where everybody counts and everybody will be able to reach their American dream. And I have